The threat did not arrive like a storm. It came quietly, almost politely, wrapped in the careful composure Ivy had perfected over the years. And perhaps that was what made it so much more dangerous. There was no shouting, no dramatic declaration at first, just a conversation that lingered too long in Steffi's office, a tone that shifted ever so slightly from cordial to calculated, and a pair of eyes that revealed far more than the words being spoken. Steffi felt it before she fully understood it. There was something wrong. Ivy stood across from her, composed and elegant as always, her posture relaxed but deliberate, as if every movement had been rehearsed. She spoke of business first, of design rights, of ownership disputes, of legacy. The conversation followed familiar lines, one Steffi had navigated countless times before. The Forrester name carried weight, and with it came constant challenges, negotiations, and power struggles. None of that was new, but Ivy was different today. There was an edge beneath her calm, something sharp and unyielding that pressed against Steffi's instincts. It was in the way she paused between sentences, in the way her gaze lingered just a second too long, in the way her words seemed to circle something unspoken. And then, without warning, she said it. "Do you know everything about your husband?" The question was simple. Too simple. It landed with a force that made Steffi's breath hitch, though she refused to show it. She held Ivy's gaze, her expression steady, her voice controlled. "Of course I do," she replied. But even as she said it, something inside her shifted, because certainty, once absolute, had already begun to fracture. Ivy smiled then, not warmly, not kindly, but with a quiet satisfaction that made Steffi's stomach tighten. "That's what I thought," she said softly, "before I learned the truth." The air in the room changed. It thickened, charged with a tension that was no longer subtle, no longer deniable. Steffi's heart began to beat faster, though her outward composure remained intact. She had learned long ago how to mask fear, how to stand firm even when the ground beneath her felt unstable. "What truth?" she asked. Ivy didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, her presence invading Steffi's space in a way that felt intentional, strategic. "Finn has a child," she said. The words struck like a physical blow. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The office, the city beyond the windows, the carefully constructed life Steffi had built. There was only that sentence, echoing endlessly, reshaping everything it touched. "That's not possible," Steffi said, though her voice lacked the conviction she wanted it to carry. "It is," Ivy replied. "And the most interesting part? He doesn't even know." Silence followed. Not the kind that brought clarity, but the kind that deepened confusion, that stretched the distance between what was known and what was suddenly possible. Steffi felt it pressing in on her, tightening around her thoughts, making it difficult to breathe. "You're lying," she said finally. But Ivy only tilted her head slightly, as if expecting that reaction. "I wish I were," she said. "It would make this so much simpler." Steffi's hands clenched at her sides, her nails pressing into her palms as she fought to maintain control. "Explain," she demanded. And Ivy did. Not all at once, not in a rush, but with careful precision, revealing just enough to destabilize, to force Steffi into a position where doubt could no longer be ignored. She spoke of the past, of a time before Finn had fully become the man Steffi knew, of decisions made, without his knowledge, of interference from someone who had believed they were protecting him. Lee. The name alone added another layer of complexity, another thread in a web that was already becoming impossibly tangled. Lee had always been protective of Finn, fiercely so, sometimes to the point of control. But this was something else entirely. "She knew," Ivy said. "She knew about the child and made sure Finn never found out." Steffi shook her head, as if the motion itself could push the words away. "No," she said. "No, that doesn't make any sense." "It doesn't have to," Ivy replied. "It just has to be true." The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as the weight of the revelation settled into place. Steffi's mind raced, searching for inconsistencies, for reasons to dismiss what she was hearing. But Ivy's confidence left little room for doubt. And you expect me to just believe you? Steffi asked, her voice sharper now, edged with anger. I expect you to verify it, Ivy said calmly. Because you will. You won't be able to stop yourself. That more than anything struck a nerve, because it was true. Even now, even in the face of something so devastating, Steffi could feel the pull of it, the need to know, to uncover, to confirm or deny with certainty. Doubt was not something she could live with, not when it came to Finn, not when it came to their family. What do you want? Steffi asked, the question heavy with implication. Ivy's smile returned, slow and deliberate. Eric's designs, she said. Full ownership. No more disputes. No more negotiations. Steffi stared at her, the audacity of the demand cutting through the fog of shock. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a choice, Ivy corrected. You can keep your marriage intact, your family safe, your life exactly as it is, or you can risk losing all of it. The words hung in the air, undeniable in their intent. This wasn't business. This was war. And Steffi was already at a disadvantage. By the time Ivy left, the office felt unbearably quiet. The absence of her presence did nothing to ease the tension she had left behind. If anything, it made it worse, because now there was nothing to distract from the truth that had been set in motion. Steffi stood alone, her reflection staring back at her from the glass walls around her. She looked the same, composed, strong, unshaken. But inside, everything was shifting. Finn had a child he didn't know about, a child hidden from him by his own mother. And Ivy knew. Not only knew, but was willing to use that truth as leverage, as a weapon designed to dismantle everything Steffi held dear. The realization settled slowly, painfully. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about survival. Because if Ivy followed through on her threat, if she brought that child into their lives without warning, without preparation, it wouldn't just be a revelation. It would be an explosion. One that could destroy everything. Steffi didn't go home right away. She couldn't. The thought of facing Finn, of looking into his eyes while carrying this knowledge, felt impossible. She needed time. Space. Something to ground her before she stepped back into a life that now felt fragile in a way it never had before. But time was not a luxury she truly had. Because Ivy would not wait. That much was clear. The pressure began almost immediately, subtle at first, then increasingly direct. Messages. Calls. Reminders of the offer, of the consequences of refusing it. Each interaction was carefully measured, designed to keep Steffi off balance, to push her closer to a decision she wasn't ready to make. And beneath it all, the question remained. Was it true? That question became her anchor. Because before she could decide anything, before she could respond, react, or resist, she needed to know. So she began to investigate. Quietly. Carefully. Every step taken in secrecy. Every inquiry made with caution. She couldn't risk Finn finding out. Not yet. Not until she had something concrete, something undeniable. The stakes were too high for assumptions. Too high for half-truths. But the deeper she went, the more complicated it became. Records were missing. Timelines didn't align. There were gaps, intentional ones, that suggested someone had worked very hard to keep this hidden. And all signs pointed back to Lee. The woman who had always been so certain, so controlled, so unwavering in her protection of Finn. What had she done? And why? The questions multiplied, each one leading to another, each one pulling Steffi further into a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The investigation consumed her, slipping into every moment, every thought. Even when she was with Finn, even when she tried to act normal, it lingered beneath the surface, shaping her words, her reactions, her silences. Finn noticed. Of course he did. He had always been perceptive, attuned to the smallest shifts in her mood. Something's wrong, he said one evening, his voice gentle but firm. Steffi forced a smile, the effort costing her more than she expected. I'm just tired, she replied. But he didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes. And that made it harder. Because the more he looked at her with concern, with trust, with love, the more unbearable the weight of the secret became. She was protecting him, or betraying him. She couldn't tell anymore. Meanwhile, Ivy's pressure intensified. Deadlines were set. Ultimatums were implied. The demand for Eric's designs became more insistent, less negotiable. It was no longer a proposal, it was an expectation. And every delay, every hesitation from Steffy was met with a reminder of what was at stake. "Time is running out," Ivy said during one call, her tone calm but unyielding. "And so is your ability to control how this comes out." The message was clear. If Steffy didn't act, Ivy would. And when she did, there would be no controlling the fallout. The walls were closing in. Every path forward carried risk. Every decision threatened to unravel something essential. Steffy stood at the center of it all, caught between the life she had built and the truth that could destroy it. And the most terrifying part? She still didn't know which was worse. Losing everything, or living with a lie. The moment Steffy chose not to confront Finn, something inside her quietly shifted. Not broken, not yet, but bent under the weight of a truth she could neither confirm nor deny. It was a fragile, dangerous place to exist, between knowledge and ignorance, between trust and suspicion. And the longer she remained there, the more unstable everything became. She began to understand that Ivy's power did not lie solely in what she knew, but in when she chose to reveal it. That realization came to her late one night, long after Finn had fallen asleep beside her. The room was dark, but her mind refused to follow. She lay still, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, searching for something in it, guilt, perhaps, or innocence, but finding neither. He slept peacefully, untouched by the storm gathering around him, and that, more than anything, unsettled her. If he didn't know, truly didn't know, then he was as vulnerable as she was. And that changed the nature of everything. Steffy turned her head slightly, studying his face in the dim light. This was the man she had built her life with, the man she had trusted without hesitation. Every memory they shared now felt like it existed under a question mark, not because of something he had done, but because of what might have been hidden from him. That distinction mattered. It was the only thing keeping her from collapsing under the weight of doubt. But Ivy's words refused to fade. Finn has a child he doesn't even know about. And somewhere out there, that child existed, not as a possibility, but as a reality that had been deliberately erased from his life. Steffy closed her eyes, but the images came anyway, fragmented, imagined, incomplete. A small face she had never seen. A life unfolding in obscurity. A connection that could shatter everything if brought into the light. By morning, she had made a decision. She would find the truth before Ivy could weaponize it. But the path forward was anything but clear. The deeper Steffy dug, the more deliberate the concealment appeared. This wasn't a secret that had simply been forgotten. It had been buried. Carefully. Methodically. Every lead she followed seemed to dissolve just as it began to take shape. Records ended abruptly. Names changed. Locations shifted. It was as if someone had rewritten reality itself to ensure that no trace remained. And at the center of it all, always was Lee. Steffy had always respected her, even when they disagreed. Lee was formidable, unwavering in her convictions, and fiercely protective of Finn. But this went beyond protection. This was control. This was a decision made on someone else's behalf, a life-altering decision. And Steffy needed to understand why. The confrontation, when it finally came, was not planned. It happened in a moment of opportunity, when Lee least expected it. Steffy arrived unannounced, her composure intact, but her resolve unmistakable. There was no pretense, no gradual easing into the conversation. She didn't have the luxury of subtlety anymore. "You hid something from Finn," Steffy said. Lee didn't react immediately. She simply looked at her, assessing, measuring, as if determining how much Steffy already knew. It was a silence that spoke volumes. "Careful," Lee replied finally. "Accusations require proof." Steffy stepped closer, her voice steady, but edged with urgency. Did he have a child you kept from him? The question hung between them, sharp and irreversible. For a brief moment, something flickered in Lee's eyes, not surprise, but recognition. And then just as quickly it was gone. You've been speaking to the wrong people, Lee said. That's not an answer. No, Lee agreed calmly. It's a warning. But Steffy wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. If it's not true, then say it, she pressed. Say it isn't real. Lee held her gaze, unblinking. And didn't. That silence was all the confirmation Steffy needed. The ground beneath her seemed to shift, but she forced herself to remain steady. Why? She asked, her voice quieter now, but no less intense. Why would you do that to him? Lee's expression hardened, not with anger, but with something deeper, conviction. Because he wasn't ready, she said. Because his future would have been destroyed by a mistake he didn't even understand. A child isn't a mistake, Steffy shot back.
No, Lee replied.
But the circumstances can be. The words carried a weight that hinted at something more, something Steffy didn't yet fully grasp. Where's the child? She asked. Lee didn't answer, and that refusal spoke louder than anything else. Steffy left with more questions and answers, but one thing was now undeniable. Ivy wasn't lying, which meant the threat was real. And growing. The pressure intensified almost immediately after that. Ivy seemed to sense the shift, as if she could feel Steffy getting closer to the truth. Her messages became more pointed, her demands more aggressive. There was no longer any attempt to disguise the ultimatum. Decide, Ivy said during one meeting, her voice calm but absolute. Because I won't wait forever. Steffy met her gaze, the fear still there but now tempered by something stronger. Determination. You're playing a dangerous game, she said. Ivy smiled faintly. So are you. But what Ivy didn't see, what she couldn't see, was the shift happening beneath the surface. Because Steffy was no longer reacting. She was preparing. The investigation had changed her. It had forced her to think differently, to move carefully, to anticipate not just Ivy's actions, but the consequences of every possible outcome. This wasn't just about protecting her marriage anymore. It was about controlling how the truth emerged, if it had to emerge at all. And there was something else now. A growing suspicion. Because the more she learned, the more she began to question one crucial detail. Why would Ivy wait? If she truly held something this explosive, something capable of destroying not just a marriage but reputations, legacies, entire families, why hadn't she already used it? The answer came slowly, piece by piece. Because Ivy didn't have everything. She had enough to threaten, but not enough to prove. And that was the weakness Steffy needed. From that moment on, the dynamic shifted. Ivy was no longer the only one holding leverage. Steffy began to push back, not openly, not recklessly, but strategically. She delayed decisions. She asked questions. She forced Ivy to reveal more than she intended, to expose the limits of her knowledge. And Ivy, for the first time, faltered. It was subtle, a hesitation, a deflection, but it was there. And Steffy saw it. The power balance was changing, but the danger remained. Because even without full proof, Ivy still had enough to cause damage. And time was still running out. Meanwhile, at home, the distance between Steffy and Finn had become impossible to ignore. The silence between them was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, filled with unspoken questions and carefully avoided truths. Finn tried to reach her, again and again. But each time, she pulled back, not out of lack of love, but because she no longer knew how to stand in front of him without seeing the shadow of a life he had never known. You're shutting me out, he said one night, his voice strained with frustration. Steffy looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment, everything inside her nearly broke. I'm trying to protect us, she said. From what? The question lingered, unanswered, because the truth was too big, too dangerous, and not entirely hers to tell.
Yet.
But as the walls closed in, as Ivy's pressure mounted and the truth edged closer to the surface, one thing became painfully clear. This couldn't stay hidden forever. And when it came out, it wouldn't just change everything. It would redefine who they all were. And who they would become after the truth finally.